Yeah. And I had another point and I just totally lost it too. I blame the pinner. Yeah, and I think that the no, I totally lost it. Sorry.
That's all right.
You're listening to a Christian and an atheist walk into a bar. With me is Ty. Beer is proof that God wants us to be happy, Gallenbeck. And myself, Jay. Hangovers are proof that God doesn't exist, Stooksbury. And how you doing today, man?
I'm good.
Yeah?
It's a little weird. Like, it's earlier than normal. We're recording and kind of had to reschedule today, but we're here.
We're fresh off of doing yard work, so we're probably a little fresh, and thankfully you guys can't smell us on the other end of this podcast.
That's right. So, and that also means we didn't get very adventurous with the beverages we're drinking today because we went with what was cold and already in the fridge.
Yeah, so. Yeah. I'm back to drinking Pinner again, which I think I was drinking the last time we recorded, I've got nothing else to add other than I still enjoy Pinner.
It's still delicious.
It's still delicious.
And I am drinking some New Belgium Fat Tire because that's currently what's on tap.
Always
in the
a
home
classic.
Bar. Yeah. One of the first beers I fell in love with. So
yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about an article that was actually submitted on the Facebook page by one of the listeners named Clint. So thank you, Clint, for sending us this article. The article was posted on bigthink.com, and it was titled, "Are Religious People More Moral?" So we're going to kind of dive into that article and talk about it, but do you want to summarize the article, just kind of a 10,000-foot perspective?
Yeah, so and we'll make sure to link the article too in our variety of posts too, so that way people can read it and digest it for themselves. But the crux of it was basically starts off with the question: are religious people more moral? And it prefaces it with the notion that in the United States, atheists are viewed with a pretty big, basically with the assumption that they're just not the most moral people in the world. And there's always a little bit of skepticism about them, especially in like holding political office or things of that nature. But the article then goes into a variety of different research that relates to how people make moral decisions and how that reflects upon their own religious convictions. And a lot of the findings from the various studies, like the Good Samaritan study, basically came to the conclusion that people do good regardless of their religiosity, I think is kind of the word they use. So basically the principle is then, does religion matter in terms of making moral decisions? And for the most part, I believe this article kind of concludes that it doesn't.
Right.
I think is the best way to summarize it.
Yeah, on my side of things, I'm definitely going to, this article is pretty one-sided. You can tell from the angle they're coming at. Not to say that I disagree with all of it because of that, but you can see the bias in this for sure. And it definitely points to the conclusion. And they're not targeting a specific religion. It's a very broad scope religion that basically any religion does not have a direct correlation to moral values or being a moral person.
Sure. So. And I do think it's interesting, though, that it does start off talking about atheists in America being the most untrustworthy group.
Yeah, I was trying to pull up the actual quote.
Yeah, but it basically, and I've seen this study before where they've polled Americans in terms of who would they most likely vote for, and they list a Muslim, an atheist, a Christian. They go through those kind of key categories, and atheists always ends up being dead last in all of those studies. I mean, and we're behind Muslims, which a lot of people hate Muslims. And that's saying a lot too. And I always find it funny because we do not have any openly atheist senators or congressmen or presidents or anything in the course of our history as far as a country is concerned.
Right.
And it is something that is uniquely American as well. And it's something that I believe it referred it to as basically political suicide, as if you're an atheist. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, so the exact quote at the start of this article is, based on this study, widespread and extreme moral prejudice against atheists around the world. Across all continents, people assume that those who committed immoral acts, even extreme ones like serial murder, were most likely to be atheists, which is,
how much
two things are connected.
I know, how much I murder on a regular basis, so it's a fair assumption, right?
That's right. So, but I think you probably have a pretty good first-hand experience to the quote of political suicide when it comes to atheism.
And I having just recently run for office myself, I had that thought when I first announced, and this is right after we had started the podcast, and I'd been unabashedly open about being an atheist too, and I always wondered how would that affect me as far as running for office, because it is true. I mean, people don't necessarily trust atheists, and I can't say like that's what cost me the election or anything like that, but I definitely had some.
It's probably top 2.
Yeah, well, top 3, somewhere in there. Probably the way I smell right now, it wouldn't have helped, but and I had some anecdotal experiences where some of my people that were helping me out, some of my volunteers, had mentioned having conversations with folks that said, "Oh, I really like Jay, but I just can't vote for him because he's an atheist." And I mean, this was probably, less than 5,
Right.
But it's just strange that actually stops people from making that next step of supporting me,
Right.
And because I'm running for city council, I'm not running for Pope, or I'm not running for anything that has to do. I don't see how my religious identity ties into the duties that I would be bound to honor, in that process. But I do think that there is a mistrust because of how much we connect the notion of political leadership with having some sort of moral compass. If you can't say God bless America with some sincerity, I think people are a little mistrusting of you,
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've always, I think from my side, watching Christians in the voting world, I think we weigh way too much on the religious affiliation. Because very often, as I have seen it, the most qualified person for the job, if you took that term out of politics, like if nobody considered that, people would vote a lot differently, just based on qualifications, knowledge, those kind of things.
Sure.
And yet they weigh so much into that it makes it a challenge. But, all right, so let's dive in. A few key points that this article kind of hit on that kind of stood out maybe to you, because I think just based on the conversation we've had today and on this article a week ago or so when it was posted, different things stood out to us throughout it. So what were a couple of the things that you saw that maybe stood out in this article?
Well, I think the article really does try to focus on research related to human behavior, and basically how do humans behave in terms of making choices of right or wrong You know, and how does their religious views relate to the way they act, or can we, from a quantitative standpoint, find patterns in behavior that are linked to religious identity? And I think the bulk of the research that they presented said that you really couldn't.
Right.
You know, people make decisions regardless of it. You know, I think we even talked about this in our past episode, is that atheists still can be moral beings,
Right.
even if they don't necessarily assign that to some sort of entity that resides over them, you know, in terms of a deity is concerned. So I think that was kind of the one thing that really stood out for me, at least.
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting in how the article kind of points out the fact that morality does exist across the board, regardless of beliefs.
Right.
And their kind of take on that, which I wouldn't have ever thought of this, but like Christianity uses that point as kind of a sign of a creator. Like that's often one of the points that Christianity will use, and I tend to agree with that. But this article also pointed out the idea that religions have just capitalized on the fact that that exists. So the article kind of says that because people noticed this, they created religion. Like they used it to kind of capitalize and use that organic morality to their advantage, I guess. Which I thought that was interesting. I had never, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with that or, you know, which way that would go, but I've never heard that point. So,
and I do think that if we're I'm verging, we're good about this and going in non sequiturs here, but in the course of human history, religion has been a helpful tool to explain natural phenomenon and kind of you know, spread that information out on a much grander scale too.
Yeah.
And I think you at least do have to recognize that religion too does play a role in the organization of society as a whole too. It's how you build how it's built mass cooperation across the board. You know, I mean the Roman Empire is the best example of that. You know, and how they integrated religion into organizing a very large multitude of people. So yeah, I think that is a key point.
So another one of the things that kind of, I mean, for me, the church often has said, the Christian church, I should say in this case, has often pointed out this same kind of findings as a problem. Like it's something we identify as an issue that you don't see a difference from outside the church to inside the church. Often divorce rates and things like that are brought up. I know when I was in college, one of the things that was brought up was during Christian conventions, hotels notice a spike in porn rentals and things like that. And so just that hypocritical nature, or whatever you want to call it, of the church is prevalent. And I would be interested if you dove into this. Like one of the things that I would like to see with a study like this is, okay, how many of these people go, you know, 4 big Sundays out of the year and call themselves a Christian?
Right.
Like, because if you're weighing those people, like, I don't expect to see a big difference. But what about the people that, you know, go every Sunday, are involved, those kind of things? Like, would you see a difference there? And that's not addressed in this specific article.
No, it really isn't. And I think that's a great point, because I think that how and I think we always come back to this, is this notion of how we self-identify doesn't necessarily tie into how we actually act and behave, you know, because I think we've been very clear about this, is that there are assholes on both sides of the equation, you know.
Story.
Pardon my French. But I think that there's definitely occasions where you can point to the religious hypocrisy, but there's just as many goofball atheists that do prove a point,
Right.
in terms of just being immoral in their own actions. So again, it's all tied into those tribal identities that don't necessarily mean anything unless you're acting upon them on a regular basis.
Right. Yeah, and I think you could see this. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I feel like I see the same kind of ideas in like racism, like in a negative side of things. Like the assumption is that this people group is all like this.
Sure.
And so they associate that across the board with that people group. And I think this article is kind of saying that, well, when you look at religious people, they're all supposed to be these super moral,
Sure.
Pope-like figures. And the reality is, like you said, people are people across the board. There's good people, there's bad people. And I guess the part of me that wants the article to be wrong, and it's probably not, is you would hope there would be a higher percentage of those people in the church. But this article is stating across the board, regardless of religious affiliation, it doesn't show a noticeable increase, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and I had another point and I just totally lost it too. I blame the pinner. Yeah, and I think that the no, I totally lost it. Sorry.
That's all right. So one of the other things, I'll just jump in on that.
Thank you.
So one of the other things that I thought was interesting, and I would be curious to know where this research came from, because I've seen contradictory research, was that religious people are less charitable. Which I have seen studies or reports, at least, where when natural disasters happen,
Sure.
Red Cross receives a majority of their donations from religious institutions. And so that was one of those that I would be curious to see where that research came and to kind of double check that math, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think you can't ignore the amount of money that these institutions have available for those types of things too. So,
Right.
And they are quick to mobilize in terms of getting people on the ground too. So that's always something I always notice, and something I always appreciate of various church groups that are able to quickly go to disaster, ravaged areas. One thing I find interesting about this is that the relationship, or at least the skepticism about the morality of atheists, is kind of a uniquely American thing.
Right.
And a lot of the research they talked about is on an international scale, but the religiosity of kind of the Christian right, I think is the best way to put it, is something that is unique to the United States. And there's actually some other interesting research that I've been reading in that talks about how there are the more the more that people identify with in a more of an evangelical Christian sort of denomination, the more likely there's going to be a broader atheist population too. But as the number of evangelical Christians decreases in various communities, there's also a proportional decrease in atheism as well.
Interesting.
So there's some people that believe that, or they've made the conclusion that atheists can also mostly just be a pushback to evangelical forces too, which I think is actually a fair assumption.
I could see that.
I even think about how I started considering myself to be atheist was usually as a result of those in my community who I found to be reprehensible Christians,
Right.
in terms of the things that they're saying, the things they were doing. And
Yeah.
I thought the best way of like not being a part of that was planting my flag on the other side.
Right.
So I can definitely see how that plays a part in how people identify, and specifically on my side of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think now it's my turn to lose my train of thought. I was trying to go back to how you started that conversation, and this is what we get for recording in the middle of the afternoon.
Yeah, we're out of our element, man.
It's just not there. So I want to just bring up, because I think it's an interesting study, the Good Samaritan study part of this, and what did you think about that? And then I'll kind of chime in a little. But
so I think I mean, the key takeaway from it, at least from my understanding of it, and we're talking my quick read of it on my phone 5 minutes before we started it, and just for those that haven't read the article, I'll just go ahead and kind of preface it. So the researchers monitored who would stop to help an injured person lying in an alley, and the basic result of the study was that they found that religiosity played no role in helping behavior, even when participants were on their way to deliver a talk on the parable of the Good Samaritan. So basically, it's just the study itself was, when push comes to shove, when you are really good about talking about what Jesus said or what Jesus did, when the moment was needed, would you act in accordance with what is the assumption of what would a good Samaritan do?
Right.
And I think the findings basically just said that it didn't have anything to do with their religious identity.
Right. The irony to that section for me is that's exactly the story of the Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
Like,
do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, like that 2,000 years ago, society was exactly the same. Like, that the people that walked by this guy were the religious people, and the guy that stopped was not. And so I just think it's funny that they're using that study, and really, I mean, it's the same story. Like, that's the same story that Jesus told 2,000 years ago about religious people walking by. So this is not a new trend. It's not a new issue that people say one thing and do another.
Right.
And I think I've said for a long time, but based on your other comment, that Christians do more harm to Christianity than anyone outside the church. And so it's a lot of those kind of behaviors that do it. And I've had so many conversations over the years where it gets to a point where I end up saying, the Jesus you don't believe in, I don't believe in him either. Because there's this misrepresentation of what I think that really looks like.
He's white,
blonde,
blue eyes,
and
Republican.
Chuck Norris holding a sheep.
Yeah, that's Jesus, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that go into that.
So then, do you have, and I'm sure you do you have any specific examples or experiences of a case where you encountered someone who, or you maybe pushed back against someone who kind of represented that sort of religious hypocrisy, that may have said something that you thought, yeah, that's not, you can't just hide behind Jesus on this one. Have you ever had a moment where you and you don't have to name names or anything like that?
Well, I mean, the one that popped to mind first, I've had a lot of theological debates in our community, but the one that I had to deal with on probably the most personal level was when we had a student coming to our group that was homosexual, and a specific member of our community made some very public announcements about how those people should be treated. And she considers herself, the utmost of Christianity, and yet the words she said were some of the most hateful things that I have ever seen. And so in that case, it wasn't a face-to-face confrontation with her, but in a conversation with that student, trying to get them to understand that, no, what she's saying does not represent who we are at all. And that's tough because, okay, so now let's wrap this back to the article. She identifies as that.
Right.
And yet for me, when I look at that person, I would say she is as far from what she's identifying as possible. And so when you put those things in a study like this, it's so hard to get real data.
Right. Well, and I think that goes back to the point that I was making about how religion plays a part in kind of organizing groups, right? It's kind of like the 80-20 rule. If you can agree with 80% of somebody else, you're more than willing to identify as that same group. It's like that's why you have political parties that nobody agrees on everything, but they have some kind of key tenets that they kind of their sticking points that they could say, like, well, okay, well, I guess that's enough for me to call me one of you, know. And I think that's definitely the case with the concept of Christianity. You can have a really broad coalition of people from one end of the spectrum being like Seventh-day Adventists to the other side of the spectrum being the gay bashers, know, but all at the same point they still fall under the Christian umbrella, know, which I think is kind of it's a really interesting phenomena, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah. This may have came up before on the podcast, but when I was in college, because the college I went to brought people from a lot of different backgrounds, one of our theology instructors in probably the first month of school he called it esse bene esse, which Greek for essential, non-essential. And so it was probably a survey of about 100 different things. And the idea was you went through and marked what you thought was necessary to be considered a Christian. And so people would go through and fill it out. Everybody stands up. If you have less than 50 things, sit down. Less than 40 things, sit down. Or no, the other way. If you have 10 things or less, sit down. 20 things or less. And so by the time you got to the highest number, whoever in the class had the highest number, he pointed out the fact that if we only did what we said we needed to do, you right now don't believe anybody else in this room is a Christian. And that idea that there should be essential things. There's things that have to be the core, but can we disagree on some of those outlying things? And if we can, does that still make us able to operate together in this? And I think in some cases you see that work really well. In other cases, you see that be detrimental and fall apart. But it's such an interesting balance.
Yeah,
in that community,
and it's strange too, the lines in the sand, because I actually had a really good conversation this week with someone that who considers himself Christian and deeply devout, and I've known this, and I talked about a lot of the stuff that we talked about in our last episode with him, and we were basically on the same page, and like everything that we talked about, we'd reached a certain point of the conversation. I was like, dude, everything you said to me, if that was your church, I would go to it right now, but then I was like, but here's where we kind of split ways. Like the usual water line, or what's the line in the sand for Christians, is the belief of Christ dying, resurrecting, and ascending to heaven. Right. And that's kind of like, if you don't believe in that particular incident, it's hard to call yourself a Christian, right? And he has struggled with that in the very literal sense of it. Like, did he literally die, or is this more of his his physical body was gone, but his spiritual body was in another realm, you know.
Right.
And that's and at the end of the day, though, we had this wonderful conversation where I agreed with like 90% of what he had to say, and that instant to me, I don't feel matters in the
Right.
context of how we're able to interact and how
Yeah.
we are able to engage in our community and how we're able to still be involved and still get stuff done in a positive way.
Yeah.
And it's like I just don't know why that has to be a sticking point for so many people.
Well, why do you have to make that a negative thing?
Yeah,
Like,
I don't have to make it a negative
Yeah,
thing, right?
but-
And that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like that's just one of those things. It's like, yeah, I don't agree with you about it, but I don't necessarily make that something that I have to like place judgment upon you
Right.
for it. You know,
Yeah.
it's just something that I don't agree with,
Right.
but I could still see you as a regular human being, regardless.
Yeah. No, and I think that's so important. We've kind of tangent.
Yeah, we're good at that.
That's all right. So I did want to. The other point that I wanted to bring up, because I would love to do funky experiments with this one, just because human condition and all those kind of things make, I like playing around with that. But the part where it was talking about being in a religious setting or when certain prayers were being played and those kind of things yielded more of a moral response. And they mostly brought up giving and generosity and stuff like that. But I'm curious of, how would something like that play out where, like, I don't even know. I'm trying to think of a good everyday example where you could see like bell ringers. Like, I think that would be one of those, at Christmas time, the Salvation Army bell ringers, like that is a kind of in your face constant representation of this thing. And is that what makes people more moral, that it's there, or is it because, the time of year or, what? I don't know. That was interesting to me, that when that is prevalent, people are more moral.
Yeah, and I think there's an element of morality that this article talks about in terms of almost like a social pressure sort of concept, like you're more likely to be good if somebody's watching you, and I think it alludes to that article too in terms of economic transactions. Religious people actually were more likely to be honest in those transactions because they believe that there's something watching them, and that's the way that I didn't dive into the actual article and how they phrase that, because I think that's also a different sort of notion too, because I think we're all being spied on anyway too. I mean, the NSA NSA is listening to this right now, so
Mark.
Yeah, I'm less worried about Zuckerberg than I am about the feds listening in. Mark can't make me disappear in Guantanamo.
I don't know. He may have enough power at this point.
There's our next question. Are federal agencies or large social media conglomerates more moral? But
can we just say neither?
Yeah.
That one.
True. Fact. But yeah, I think that was kind of an interesting take too, that it's less about doing right for the sake of doing right. It's doing right for the sake of being observed for doing the right thing, like that's you get the brownie point for doing that, like, look at me, I'm being moral, look at me, I'm donating to this charity sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, which all those online giving platforms that allow you to share are an interesting element in that, the GoFundMes and stuff I donated this much money.
Yeah.
It's this weird, like, backhanded.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother topic.
Right.
But that's what that made me think of I have morality. Look at me giving to whatever.
There's some, should have researched this before we started talking too, but there is a financial platform like a PayPal sort of thing right now that's really big. That's basically like the social media version of it, where people can basically you log into it, or it links to all of your social media accounts, and it has a stream of so and so donated to this entity. Like it
Oh,
basically
weird.
is kind of like a bragging right for
For donations.
yeah, for that sort of
Huh.
thing. Yeah,
It's not Venmo. That's not the one you're
it
thinking.
might be. I'm not
Like,
sure.
Venmo is a pretty social one, but it's not based on like donations. It's just a
Yeah,
So-
Yeah, I probably should have thought that out a little bit more before I spewed it
that's
out there.
interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, that is definitely a like. Well, and that's it. I mean, that does tie into this article, but if morality only exists when people are watching,
right.
does that really count as
Yeah, Yeah.
morality?
and I think we're really big on the concept of virtue signaling. Like we're rather than when a tragedy strikes, we're really quick to change our profile picture to have
Oh yeah,
the flag or the ribbon or whatever. Pray for this, pray for that, but we're not really quick to open up our wallets or to donate our time or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So, but we're really good about indicating to others that we have virtue, as opposed to actually demonstrating it.
I would agree completely. I've always wondered how many of those people that I've made it a point in my life to never use one of those, but how many of those people that post the pray for blah 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 actually follow through with that statement?
Right.
Because I know in my life for years, I'll pray for you was an easy thing to say.
Sure.
And very little follow through.
Sure.
Where I got to the point where if I said that to someone, that was the first thing I was doing at the next opportunity. Because I knew myself that if I said, I'll do that, no, I wouldn't do it. Like, it just wouldn't happen. And it wasn't like a conscious, anti-decision. It's just, that's how life is.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree that it's more of a good face to put on than necessarily an action-seeking, making a change kind of thing.
It's the thoughts and prayers right now.
Yeah.
That's the big one.
Yeah.
Anytime a tragedy strikes, people are really quick to offer thoughts and prayers to.
Because it's easy and painless.
Right.
Which doesn't really equal sacrifice.
Right.
So the last thing from this article that I just want to point out, because this is a piece I can latch on to and give credit to you in a lot of ways for this, is just the end of it is statistics show that atheists commit fewer crimes on average. The widespread prejudice against them, as highlighted by our study, reflects intuitions that have been forged through centuries and might be hard to overcome. And I really think in a lot of ways that goes both ways. There are prejudices on both sides, which we've said, there's good people on both sides, there's bad people and those things. But I do feel like, for whatever reason, there is more of a negative stereotype towards atheism. And I will fully admit, based on the scenario that brought us together, that is where my feelings and beliefs started.
Sure.
Is, that kind of confrontational, aggressive behavior. And the reality is those people are in the minority.
Well, I don't know necessarily in the minority. Probably.
Yeah, I would think so.
I can't say, a certain with a certain assertion without real research behind it. But that's also part of that. The exact group that you're referencing is part of the reason why I decided that I need to be more vocal about being an atheist.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually something that when I first moved here, I knew I was moving into a religious community, and I never once felt threatened by it or anything like that. I just knew that I would always have to be careful about how I talked about my own beliefs, and because I didn't, we also had a business, and I didn't want my beliefs to be something that hurt other people. I didn't want to drag them down to the lower levels of where us atheists preside in the cultural basement, basically. But at the same point too, though, when the incident that we're referring to occurred, there was a lot of people pushing back against this atheist group, saying like, "Oh, these damn atheists! That's all they do." I'm like, "Whoa, no, no, we don't. Whoa. No, we don't."
Right.
It was just the squeaky wheel getting the grease, basically. So I thought, you know what? I have to just be open with people. Like, I can't hide it, but I can show that I'm not a proselytizing atheist. Like, I'm not going to sit on the corner of the street with a sign that says God doesn't exist, and I'm not going to get in an argument about why God doesn't exist. Like, that's not what we're about. And I do agree with you. There is a larger portion of the secular community that are not confrontational. Like, that's not our MO. We don't. This isn't a pissing match, We're not trying to prove the size of different, I don't know where I'm going with that, but we're not trying. Yeah, we're not trying to do the reverse of holier than thou, because it's what they kind of end up doing, So that's part of the reason why I decided that I had to be more open about it. I had to demonstrate that you can be a community member, you can be involved, you can be active, you can be a business owner, you can be a loving parent and husband, and you can not believe in God, and that's okay. You can still be hopefully somewhat trusted within the community, regardless of that. Yeah. So I felt like it was my own personal PR mission to show that atheists are not necessarily assholes. Yeah. So
we may have to put an explicit tag.
I know, that's twice. I know. No more pinner for me.
So, yeah. Well, just to tease the next episode a little, part of what made me think of all that is we've been talking about doing an episode about the things that we appreciate of the other person's tribe. Sure. And what we ended up coming about is, who do you appreciate from the other person's tribe? Right. And I started to think about those people in my life that I've actually interacted with, or, that I know that would fall into the atheist category. And most of them, all of them that I would say I appreciate things about, hold some of those similar characteristics. So I think it's easy to say the majority of them do not act like that, because, 9 out of 10 that I've met are great people. So, yeah, it's just a different thing. But, so we will definitely post this article again from bigthink.com for you guys to read and kind of make your own opinions about. Definitely send us questions and thoughts that you guys come out with.
And again, thank you, Clint, for submitting it to us, because we definitely had a lot of back and forth about it, and it was a great conversation, so we decided to make an episode about it. And we definitely encourage all of you out there, if there's something that you guys want us to talk about, we're open to it. So send us your thoughts, send us your prayers, send us send us ideas that resonate with you, and things that you want to talk about or listen to us talk about, because we're always game for new material.
Absolutely. Follow us on all the social media sites, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, those kind of things. Find us on your favorite podcast provider. Jump on the corporate beast that is iTunes and leave us a review, because that really does help people find us. We have some reviews right now, but the funny thing is iTunes still doesn't recognize any of those reviews. It still says we don't have any. So apparently we need more reviews. So please jump on there. Let us know what you think about the show. If you have critiques and things that we can improve on, let us know, so that we can just make this better. But send us topics, big, heavy topics, or more lighthearted topics that you just think would be funny to hear a Christian and an atheist debate about. So send us off.
All right. This was a Christian and an atheist walk into a bar where we was where we solve the world's issues one adult beverage at a time.
Cheers.
Tongue-tied.